I always wondered, if that day had never happened, would my life have turned out differently? If Dad hadn't looked at me with those worried eyes, if Mom hadn't held my hand so tightly that my fingertips went numb, could I have stayed in those peaceful days forever? But life doesn't deal in what-ifs. That day came, and it changed everything. I was only 8 years old when I received the bad news. That day, I sat on the old wooden chair in the kitchen, my feet still too short to reach the floor, swinging in the air. My parents sat across from me, their faces more serious than I had ever seen before. My father, the strong man who used to lift me high into the air whenever I ran to him, suddenly looked fragile. "Sophia, sweetheart," my father's voice was hoarse, as if each word was a heavy stone pressing on his chest. "Daddy has something important to tell you." Cancer. A short word that carried the weight of an entire world crashing down on an 8-year-old child. I didn't fully understand what it meant, but I was smart enough to recognize the fear in my mother's eyes. The months that followed turned our little home from a place of warmth into a revolving door for doctors, nurses, relatives, and well-meaning, but empty words of encouragement. I watched my father, the man who once carried me on his back through the summer fields, grow weaker with each passing day. His illness consumed him like a slow, merciless storm. Mom tried to keep things normal. She still cooked his favorite dinners, played his beloved jazz records, and smiled at me every morning. But I wasn't naive. I knew that every night, after she thought I had fallen asleep, she cried behind their bedroom door. I would sit outside, hugging my worn-out teddy bear, wishing I could say something, anything, to ease her pain. Dad passed away when I was 10. I don't remember much about the funeral except for the overwhelming sea of black, and the way Mom's hand gripped mine so tightly it hurt. I thought, at the very least, we still had each other. But just a week later, I realized how wrong I was. 1 week after the funeral, Mom sat me down again. But this time, her expression wasn't just sorrowful, it was distant. "Sophia, I've spoken to Grandma." Her voice was soft, but I didn't like the way she looked at me, as if I were a burden instead of her daughter. "I think it would be best if you stayed with her for a while, just until I can get everything sorted out." The words hung in the air like a needle piercing my skin. I didn't understand. I thought Mom and I would get through this together. I thought that even though Dad was gone, I still had her. "Why can't I stay with you?" I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. Mom sighed and reached out to brush my hair, but the gesture felt hollow. "I just need some time, Sophia. I can't do everything right now." The next morning, Grandma arrived to pick me up. I didn't take much with me, just a small suitcase with a few clothes and the teddy bear Dad had given me on my 7th birthday. Mom didn't come outside to see me off. As Grandma's car pulled away, I turned my head, hoping for one last glimpse of her through the window. She was nowhere to be seen. Grandma's house wasn't far, just a 20-minute drive, but it felt like I had been taken to an entirely different world. My grandmother, Helen, was a strict but kind woman. When we stepped inside, she simply said, "You can consider this your home." She never spoke about Mom, never asked me how I felt about being left behind. But she showed her love in quiet ways, making my favorite chicken soup, knitting me a scarf as winter approached, telling me stories about Dad when he was a boy. Still, I kept waiting. At first, Mom called every week. "Things aren't settled yet, but I'll bring you home soon." Weeks turned into months. Each time I asked when I could return, she always said, "Just a little longer, sweetheart, I promise." But that promise never came true. After 6 months, I stopped believing her. I had given up hope that my mother would ever come back for me. After 6 months of waiting in vain, I accepted that Grandma Helen was the only family I had left. But then, one afternoon in March, as I was doing my homework at the kitchen table, an unfamiliar car pulled up in front of the house. I peeked out the window and saw Mom stepping out of a silver sedan. She looked different. Her hair perfectly styled, her makeup flawless, and her beige dress giving her an air of sophistication I barely recognized. But it wasn't her polished appearance that made me hesitate. It was the man still sitting in the car. Mom practically rushed into the house, her face lit up with excitement. So different from the grieving woman I remembered. "Sophia, sweetheart!" She grabbed my hands, her voice filled with a giddiness that felt foreign. "I have the most wonderful news. I got married." I blinked, feeling as though the room had tilted. "You're going to have a new family, a new father, and 2 sisters, isn't that amazing?" I didn't know how to react. For 6 months, I had waited for Mom, believing she would take me back to the home I had shared with Dad. But now she was telling me I had a new family. A new father. Grandma Helen stepped into the room, arms crossed, her sharp gaze fixed on my mother. "Sarah, this is the first time you've shown up in 6 months, and now you think you can just take the girl back like nothing happened?" Mom forced a smile. "Mother, I know this is sudden, but this is what's best for Sophia." I wasn't sure what that meant, but when Mom pulled me toward the car, I knew I didn't have a choice. The new house was bigger, more modern, but it didn't feel like home. Standing on the front steps were 2 girls my age, Madison and Chloe, my stepfather's daughters. Both wearing identical pink dresses, their blonde hair perfectly curled like porcelain dolls. "Hi there," Madison said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "We've heard so much about you," Chloe added, but there was something in her eyes that made my skin crawl. Behind me, Mom placed a hand on my shoulder, beaming. "We're going to be one big happy family." But when I met Madison and Chloe's gaze, I knew it was nothing but a lie. Mom's wedding took place just 3 weeks after I moved in. The ceremony was extravagant, decorated with white roses and scented candles, something straight out of a bridal magazine. Madison and Chloe wore matching ivory bridesmaid dresses, their smiles bright as they stood beside my mother. Me? I was nothing more than a stranger at my own family's event. Mom had picked out a pale blue dress for me. Simple, plain, and completely out of place against the elegant color scheme. When the photographer called for a family portrait, I quietly stepped toward my mother. But before I could settle in, Madison and Chloe wedged themselves between us, forcing me to the edge. "Careful, Sophia," Madison whispered, her voice light as air but full of meaning. I was nearly invisible in the wedding photos. When the pictures were printed and framed throughout the house, I had to squint to find myself, tucked away in a corner, like an outsider, rather than my mother's daughter. That Christmas only cemented my place in the family. Under the glittering Christmas tree, Madison and Chloe eagerly tore into their presents. Large boxes, wrapped in bright red ribbons. Their delighted squeals filled the room as they uncovered brand new iPads, designer sneakers, and expensive handbags. I carefully unwrapped mine, a cheap phone and a few bargain bin clothes I recognized from the clearance rack. Mom smiled as she watched me. "I thought you'd like it, Sophia. Your old phone was so outdated." I said nothing. I knew there was no point in arguing. But the unfair gifts were only the tip of the iceberg. The real cruelty happened in silence. One day, I found the necklace Dad had given me, snapped in half. The silver pendant, the only thing I had left from him, lay scratched on the floor of my bedroom. I went straight to Madison, my voice shaking. "Did you do this?" She shrugged, her eyes cold. "If you don't have proof, don't go around accusing people." Then there was the art set Grandma Helen had sent me. It was a special edition. She knew I loved drawing and wanted me to keep pursuing my passion. I found it completely destroyed. The colored pencils were snapped in half, my sketchbook soaked in water, and my drawing paper covered in smeared ink. This time I ran straight to Mom. "Look! They ruined everything!" She sighed, rubbing her temples. "Sophia, don't be so sensitive. Maybe you left them outside and it rained. You can't always blame your sisters." I stood there clutching my ruined sketchbook, tears burning in my eyes. That was when I truly understood. No matter what I did, I would always be an outsider in this house. When Mom announced she was pregnant, the entire family erupted in excitement. Everyone, except me. Robert pulled her into a tight embrace, his face lighting up as if this was the greatest thing that had ever happened to him. Madison and Chloe squealed, giggling as they gushed about how fun it would be to have a little brother or sister. I sat quietly, feeling more pushed aside than ever. 9 months later, Noah was born, a beautiful baby boy with soft brown hair and bright blue eyes, just like Robert. And just like that, the entire house revolved around Noah. Mom almost completely forgot I existed. 3 weeks after Mom was discharged from the hospital, they called me into the living room. Mom sat on the couch, cradling Noah in her arms, her eyes soft with affection, as if he were the only thing that mattered in her world. Robert sat beside her, nodding along to every word she said. Madison and Chloe stood behind them, arms crossed, waiting for what was about to unfold. "Sophia, we need to talk." I had a bad feeling, but nothing could have prepared me for what came next. "Now that Noah is here, we need to reorganize the space in the house," Mom said. Robert chimed in. "Your room is the best option for the baby. It's close to our bedroom, and there's plenty of space for his crib and all his things." I clenched my fists. "Then where am I supposed to sleep?" Mom smiled, as if she had already rehearsed the answer. "You'll share a room with Madison and Chloe. It'll be a great opportunity for the three of you to bond." I let out a sharp laugh. One that carried no humor. "No. This is my room." The room fell into silence. I met Mom's gaze, head on. "This house belonged to my dad. He bought it. He built a life here. Robert and his kids have no right to push me out of my own room." Mom's expression darkened. "Sophia, don't be disrespectful. Robert is my husband, and he's your stepfather. We are a family." Robert folded his arms, his voice cold. "You're being selfish, Sophia. We've all made sacrifices for this family, and you can't even give up a room for your little brother?" Madison smirked. Chloe whispered something into her ear, and the two of them giggled mockingly. I felt like I was being pushed to the edge of a cliff with no one to hold on to. Mom looked at me, her eyes glistening as if she were the one being hurt. "I'm really disappointed in you." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "Then consider me gone." After that day, no one spoke to me again. Mom stopped calling me down for breakfast. Robert passed by me as if I didn't exist. Madison and Chloe didn't taunt me anymore. Because to them, I wasn't even worth acknowledging. I used to think their cruel words were the worst thing they could do to me. But I was wrong. Silence was far worse. 3 days. That's how long they all went without saying a single word to me. No snide remarks from Madison or Chloe. No fake concern from Mom. No disapproving lectures from Robert. They had erased me completely from their lives. And it was time I did the same. That night, as laughter echoed from the living room. Their laughter, a perfect little family that no longer included me. I reached for my phone and dialed the only number of someone who still cared. Grandma Helen picked up on the first ring. "Sophia." Her voice was warm, concerned. I tried to hold back my tears but failed. "Grandma, I can't stay here anymore." 15 minutes later, the headlights of her old car shone in the driveway. I looked out the window and saw her standing there, firm and unwavering. Without hesitation, I threw a few clothes and my old teddy bear into a backpack and headed downstairs. Mom and Robert spotted me as I walked toward the front door. "Who do you think you're doing?" Mom asked, her voice sharp as if she had only just remembered I existed. I zipped up my bag and took a deep breath. "I'm leaving." Mom blinked, perhaps not believing that I had actually said those words. Robert crossed his arms, irritation flickering in his eyes. "Where do you think you're going? This is your home." I turned to look at Mom. "No, you took it away from me a long time ago." No one stopped me as I walked out the door. Grandma Helen pulled me into a tight hug before helping me into the car. As we drove away from that street, I didn't look back. 2 weeks later, Grandma Helen placed a stack of papers in front of me. If you want, I can legally adopt you. But this is your decision, Sophia. You have the right to choose. For the first time in years, I felt like I had control over my own life. Without hesitation, I picked up the pen and signed my name. Mom didn't object. She signed the papers without hesitation, without even a moment of reluctance. The day I returned to the old house to collect the last of my belongings, my room had already been transformed into Noah's nursery. The walls were painted a soft blue. My bed was gone, and every trace of me had been erased. I shut the door and walked straight to Grandma's car without looking back. From that moment on, I was no longer Sarah's daughter. Life with Grandma Helen was like a breath of fresh air after years of suffocating in my mother's house. Every morning she woke up early to make breakfast for me, always placing a warm glass of milk next to my plate of pancakes. In the evenings, we sat at the kitchen table together. She knitting, me doing my homework. We didn't always talk much, but her presence alone made me feel safe. She never asked about Mom, and I never brought her up again. I focused on school. No more Madison, no more Chloe, no more Robert looking at me like I was a burden. I had space to breathe, to grow, to rediscover myself. Grandma encouraged me every step of the way, helped me study, and even attended parent-teacher meetings that Mom never bothered with. When I received a partial scholarship to New York State University, she cried tears of pride. "I always knew you could do it," she said, hugging me so tightly I could barely breathe. The summer before I left for college, she handed me a savings book. "I've been putting this aside since the day you came here. It's not much, but it's enough to give you a solid start." I opened it and nearly gasped. The amount was enough to cover my living expenses for all 4 years of college. "Grandma, why would you do this?" My voice broke. She smiled warmly. "Because you deserve a good future, Sophia." On the day I left for my dorm, she stood on the porch, waving with a bright smile, though her eyes were misty. I knew she would miss me, and I would miss her too. But, for the first time in my life, I didn't feel alone. Mom and the rest of my old family completely disappeared from my life. No texts, no calls, not a single check-in. And I stopped waiting for them. The call came on a December morning, while I was buried in my senior thesis at the library. "Sophia?" Grandma Helen's voice was weak, a far cry from the strength I had always known. "I need to talk to you." I took the earliest bus home, but by the time I arrived at the hospital, she was too weak to sit up. "Don't worry. I've lived a full life." Her frail hand squeezed mine, thin and cold. I shook my head, swallowing back tears. "You have to stay with me, Grandma." She only smiled. "You're strong enough to walk on your own now, Sophia. I'm so proud of you." 2 days later she passed away in her sleep. At her funeral, as I accepted condolences and comforting hugs from relatives and friends, I thought I would finally be left in peace. But then, they showed up. Mom, Robert, Madison, Chloe, and Noah. 7 years. 7 years without a single call, without a single message. Yet here they were, standing in front of me, looking somber. But there was no trace of the pain I had endured in their eyes. Mom was the first to speak. "Oh, darling, I'm so sorry about your grandmother. She was a wonderful woman." I nodded, saying nothing. "How have you been?" she asked, her voice a tempting warmth. I looked at her, then at the familiar faces behind her. Madison and Chloe were no longer teenagers. They had grown into young women, still beautiful, but carrying the same arrogance and insincerity I remembered all too well. Noah, the child who once took my room, was now an 8-year-old boy. He stood close to Robert, his eyes studying me with curiosity, as if I were a stranger. Finally, Mom smiled. A bit forced, a bit hesitant. "Would you like to have dinner with us? Our family has been apart for too long." That word echoed in my head. Family? I looked at Mom, at Robert, at Madison and Chloe. They were no longer my family. But I didn't answer right away. I simply gave a small smile. without any promises. I spent the entire week thinking about Mom's invitation. Would you like to have dinner with us? Our family has been apart for too long. That word. Family. A real family wouldn't abandon their daughter. A real family wouldn't stay silent for 7 years, and then suddenly appear just because of a funeral. And yet, I wanted to face them. I wanted to look them in the eye and see what they truly thought after all these years. So, I agreed. We met at a small Italian restaurant downtown. I arrived a few minutes late, just enough to observe them from a distance. Mom sat there, her hair still perfectly styled as it had been on the day she remarried, but the years had begun to leave traces around her eyes. Robert looked the same. Composed, dignified, but older. Madison and Chloe chatted easily, unchanged from the last time I saw them. Still close, still inseparable. Still no space for me between them. Noah had grown, but there was no familiarity in his eyes when he looked at me. He knew nothing about me except for whatever stories this family had told him. I walked to the table, and the conversation began. Mom talked about the past years, about their lives. Robert talked about work. Madison and Chloe shared stories about their travels, their careers. Noah proudly declared that he was the best at math in his class. They talked about so much. But no one asked about me. No one asked how I had lived all these years. No one asked what I had been through, if I was happy, if I was okay. Finally, when dessert was served, Mom placed her hand on the table and looked at me with the same gentle expression I had once longed for. Sophia, I really want to fix things. I'm so sorry for everything that happened. Can we start over? I stirred my coffee slowly, letting the question linger in the air. Then, I finally looked up and gave her a soft smile. Mom, do you actually remember what happened? Her fingers tightened slightly. Of course I do, but, you know, everyone makes mistakes. What matters is that we're here now, right? I set my spoon down, my voice calm. No, Mom. We are not a family anymore. The air in the room shifted instantly. Robert cleared his throat. Madison and Chloe stared at me wide-eyed. Mom looked stunned, as if she had never considered that I might say those words out loud. I picked up my bag and stood. Thank you for dinner, but I don't need to fix anything with people who left me when I needed them the most. Then, I walked out of the restaurant, leaving behind a family that was no longer mine. I thought that after that dinner, everything would be over. I had rejected them, severed ties that no longer held any meaning. But as it turned out, they weren't as willing to let go as I was. Mom started calling more frequently, her voice softer than I had ever remembered. At first, she asked simple things. How my job was going, if I ever felt lonely, if I missed my family. But soon, the conversations began shifting toward money. Sophia, your stepfather and I are having some financial difficulties. You know, Noah is growing so fast, he needs so many things. It's just a small amount. You can help your family, right? At first I didn't think much of it. I sent a little money to fix their car, another time to help with a bill. It wasn't much, and Mom always thanked me like I was their savior. Then Madison and Chloe started reaching out. Suddenly, they were friendly, inviting me for coffee, talking about struggles at work. They weren't the same cruel girls I once knew. They were my sisters, caring about me. Or so I thought. Everything changed on a Saturday afternoon. I had just finished a Zoom meeting and went into the kitchen to grab a drink. I left my phone on the table, unlocked. When I returned, the screen was still lit. The call hadn't ended. Mom was still on the line. And I heard everything. Does she suspect anything? Madison's voice, followed by a quiet giggle. No. She still believes us. Mom's voice, disturbingly relieved. But we have to be patient. We can't rush it. Though when can we start asking for more? Chloe sounded impatient. Mom sighed. Slowly. She thinks I'm truly sorry. She's already helping little by little. Once she gets used to it, we can start asking for larger amounts. Robert chimed in. his tone low and calculating. She has more money than we thought. A house? Savings from that old woman. We just need to make her believe that helping family is her responsibility. I froze. But what if she finds out? Madison asked. Mom laughed. A laugh I had never heard before. Sophia has always been foolish. She's desperate for family love. She'll never suspect a thing. My heart pounded against my ribs. Slowly, I picked up my phone and ended the call. My hands trembled, but my mind was clear. They had never truly wanted reconciliation. They only wanted my money. I thought long and hard after hearing that conversation. I could have cut them off immediately, blocked their numbers, disappeared, just like they had once done to me. But no. They needed to learn that I was no longer the naive child they thought I was. So I waited. It didn't take long. A few days later, Mom called again, her voice dripping with honey. Sophia, sweetheart, I'm preparing a family dinner this weekend. Everyone wants to see you. You'll come, won't you? I smiled as I spoke, my tone eerily calm. Of course, Mom. I'd love to. When I arrived at my mother's house, everything was just as I expected. A perfectly staged performance. Madison and Chloe beamed at me like they had never tormented me. Noah ran up to hug me, though it was clear he had no real memory of me. Robert sat at the head of the table, nodding at me like a respectable father figure. And Mom, still playing the role of the remorseful mother flawlessly. Dinner unfolded exactly as I predicted. They showered me with compliments, praised me for being mature, for being successful, for thinking about family. Then, just as dessert was served, Mom placed her hand over mine. Her eyes filled with hope. Sophia, I truly hate to ask you this, but... I waited, nodding slightly, pretending to be oblivious. The house is having some plumbing issues, and the roof needs repairs too. We've already gotten a quote, but it's going to cost about... Mom hesitated. $10,000. Madison and Chloe exchanged glances, while Robert slowly set his knife down on his plate, preparing to convince me. I set my glass of water down and looked around the table. Then I smiled. A soft, subtle smile. Yet it was enough to make the atmosphere in the room tense. Silence fell over the table. Mom blinked, as if she hadn't heard me correctly. What did you say? I leaned back in my chair, meeting her eyes. I said no. I won't give you a single cent. Madison slammed her fork down, Chloe frowned in annoyance, and Robert clenched his hands on the table. But Mom still tried to maintain her calm exterior. Sophia, you don't understand, this is... No, Mom, I understand perfectly, I cut her off, my voice no longer soft. I understand that you never actually wanted to make amends. I understand that you and Robert only see me as a source of money. And I understand that all the sweet words from you and my sisters over the past few months were just an act. Mom's face paled. Madison and Chloe's eyes widened. I stood up, placing both hands on the table, staring at them. I heard everything. My voice was steady. The other day, after you called me to ask for $200, you forgot to hang up. I heard you say I was stupid. I heard you call me a puppet you could manipulate. I heard you say that eventually, I'd hand over everything because I was so desperate for a family's love. Mom's mouth opened, but no words came out. Robert gritted his teeth. Madison and Chloe turned red with embarrassment. I shrugged, picking up my bag. But you were wrong. I'm not that child anymore. I turned on my heel and walked away, leaving them sitting there in stunned silence. Mom called after me, her voice shaking. Sophia, you're misunderstanding. Don't do this. We're family. I paused at the door, glancing back briefly. No, Mom, family doesn't treat each other like this. Then I stepped through that door, and never looked back. The next morning, I woke up feeling lighter than I had in years. I owed no one anything anymore. No more fake phone calls, no more honeyed words hiding greed, no more judgmental eyes waiting for me to make a mistake. I looked around Grandma Helen's house. the only place that had ever truly felt like home. The old photographs were still on the walls, the books she loved still neatly arranged on the shelves. But the space felt empty now. It was time to move forward. I called a real estate agent and decided to sell the house. "Are you sure, Sophia?" she asked, sounding surprised. "This is a beautiful home. And it seems to mean a lot to you." I smiled, but this time there was no hesitation. "I'm sure. I'll always carry my memories of Grandma with me. But right now, I need a fresh start." 3 weeks later, I moved to New York. I found a small apartment in Manhattan, not big, but just right for a new beginning. Every morning I walked down the bustling streets, grabbed coffee at my favorite cafe, and breathed in the fast-paced rhythm of the city. I threw myself into work with a renewed energy, truly feeling like I was in control of my life. No more obligations. No more manipulation. No one could take anything from me, ever again. The messages and calls from Mom, Robert, Madison and Chloe slowly dwindled when they realized I was never coming back. I blocked them all. They had forgotten me for 7 years. Now, it was my turn to forget them. One autumn afternoon, as I sat in the park watching golden leaves drift to the ground, I suddenly realized I was truly free. Grandma Helen once told me something that I only now fully understood. Family isn't just the people you share blood with. Family is the people who love you unconditionally, whether you have everything or nothing. And for the first time in my life, I no longer felt alone. I had built my own family. One without betrayal, without manipulation. Just me. And the future I chose. Sophia's story is a powerful reminder that not all blood ties equate to real love. Sometimes, the very people who are supposed to protect us are the first to exploit and hurt us. But the most important lesson Sophia learned is that family isn't defined by blood. It's defined by love and respect. Letting go of the past, cutting off toxic relationships. It's not selfish, it's self-preservation. And it's the only way to find true happiness. What do you think about Sophia's story? Could you forgive a family that abandoned and used you? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to follow the channel for more raw, emotional stories about family, love, and life.